Welcome. Today, we begin a journey into the art of the Shaki technique, an ancient Japanese practice of framing nature into your garden's view. Imagine standing in a quiet courtyard where distant mountains seem to belong to your backyard. The trees beyond your fence feel like your own. This is borrowed scenery garden design, not about owning the view, but embracing it as a living Japanese garden backdrop. The Shaki technique originated centuries ago, born from the Japanese understanding that a garden does not exist in isolation. By carefully aligning plants, stones, and water features, the view beyond becomes part of your composition. In a borrowed scenery garden, what's outside your boundary is as important as what's inside. The result is a seamless blend, where the Japanese garden backdrop feels endless, drawing the eye into nature's embrace. In a borrowed scenery garden, distance is an illusion you control. The Shaki technique invites you to layer depth, foreground plants for intimacy, middle ground features for structure, and distant landscapes for infinity. Imagine a maple arching in a corner, framing a faraway waterfall. That waterfall isn't yours, yet feels like part of your design. This blending creates an emotional openness that few landscaping styles can match. One of the beauties of the Shaki technique is its ability to turn even the smallest space into something grand. In a city courtyard, a bamboo screen might open toward a temple roofline. In a rural garden, your eye may be guided toward forested hills. A borrowed scenery garden doesn't need vast land, it needs awareness. By framing the right Japanese garden backdrop, you invite an endless horizon into a limited space, expanding its soul. Think of a borrowed scenery garden as a painting without a frame until you choose one. The Shaki technique teaches you to position elements so the outer world becomes the frame's content. A twisted pine may reveal a sunset, a stone lantern might align with a distant cherry tree. In doing this, your Japanese garden backdrop shifts with the seasons, offering a living masterpiece that changes each day. There are four main types of borrowed scenery: distant, intermediate, adjacent, and overhead. The Shaki technique uses these layers to shape your garden's mood. Distant scenery could be a mountain range. Intermediate might be a grove beyond your fence. Adjacent could be your neighbor's maple tree. Overhead might be the sky itself, framed by eaves or branches. Each becomes part of your Japanese garden backdrop, blurring boundaries with nature. Distant scenery offers the feeling of scale. The Shaki technique might frame a snow-capped peak, making your garden feel vast and open. Even in the suburbs, a distant church steeple or windmill can serve as a Japanese garden backdrop, anchoring your design in history. These faraway anchors give your garden a sense of place, reminding you that you're part of a wider landscape, not an isolated piece of earth. Intermediate scenery is where the Shaki technique adds rhythm. Imagine a row of cypress trees just beyond your wall, their silhouettes swaying in the wind. In a borrowed scenery garden, this layer connects your intimate space to the distant horizon. It acts as a bridge, softening the transition between your flowers and the mountain beyond. Your Japanese garden backdrop becomes layered, leading the eye gently with grace. Adjacent scenery can feel almost like cheating in the best way. The Shaki technique embraces whatever is just outside your boundary. A borrowed scenery garden might incorporate a neighbor's flowering plum tree, letting its blossoms cascade over your wall. This Japanese garden backdrop requires only awareness and respect. In doing so, you enhance your garden and create a quiet connection with the landscapes and lives that surround you. Overhead scenery is the Shaki technique's most poetic layer. A borrowed scenery garden might capture clouds drifting above, framed by a torii gate or cherry tree branches. The sky becomes part of your Japanese garden backdrop, changing with the weather: crisp blue in summer, soft gray in rain, deep indigo at dusk. By looking up as well as out, your garden becomes a theater for nature's passing moods. first step in mastering the Shaki technique is observation. A borrowed scenery garden begins not with planning, but with seeing. Walk your space at sunrise, at midday, and again at sunset. Notice how shadows shift, how light touches certain trees or rooftops. The perfect Japanese garden backdrop may reveal itself only at certain hours. This awareness turns design into a patient art form, where you allow the land and sky to suggest their own frames and stories. Framing is the soul of the Shaki technique. A borrowed scenery garden uses plants, architecture, or stones to direct the gaze. Perhaps a weathered wooden gate draws the eye to a distant hill, or a cluster of iris blooms aligns with the curve of a river beyond your property. This Japanese garden backdrop becomes a focal point, not by accident, but through careful alignment, like placing the lens of a camera to capture not just an image, but a feeling. Natural frames are among the most graceful tools in a borrowed scenery garden. With the Shaki technique, a pair of pine trees might arch toward each other, their branches meeting like hands, enclosing the distant pagoda in the space between. This Japanese garden backdrop creates a sense of intimacy and reverence by allowing the outside world to peek. Through these living frames, you remind yourself that beauty is often enhanced, not by what is shown, but by what is revealed. Artificial frames can be just as poetic when used with the Shaki technique. A borrowed scenery garden may employ a bamboo trellis, a lattice window, or even a round moon gate to highlight the Japanese garden backdrop beyond. The structure becomes part of the composition. Its lines guiding your vision. By setting the stage, you make distant hills or flowering trees feel like they were painted there. For your eyes alone, an ever-changing masterpiece just beyond your reach. Elevation plays a quiet but powerful role in the Shaki technique. In a borrowed scenery garden, raising your viewing point, perhaps through a terrace or small pavilion, can open sightlines to a distant lake or mountain ridge. This elevated perspective changes the Japanese garden backdrop entirely, allowing you to catch horizons you would otherwise miss. It's a reminder that sometimes, to see the beauty that's always been there, you simply need to rise a little higher. Paths in a borrowed scenery garden are more than walkways. They are storylines. With the Shaki technique, a winding path might gradually lead you toward the perfect view, revealing the Japanese garden backdrop only when you round a final bend. This moment of discovery feels intentional, like turning the page in a book to find the most beautiful illustration. In this way, walking the garden becomes a journey, with each step drawing you deeper into borrowed beauty. Seasonal shifts breathe life into the Shaki technique. A borrowed scenery garden in spring might frame distant cherry blossoms, the Japanese garden backdrop blushing with pink. In summer, the same view could be filled with deep green foliage. Come autumn, crimson maples might set it ablaze. In winter, a quiet frost might soften the edges. By choosing a backdrop that transforms with the seasons, your garden becomes a living calendar of nature's moods and colors. The borrowed scenery garden thrives on subtlety. With the Shaki technique, you don't need a dramatic backdrop to create beauty. A single windswept pine on a hill, a faint outline of mountains, through morning mist, or the glint of water between leaves can serve as a Japanese garden backdrop. These delicate touches invite the viewer to pause to look closer and to find meaning in what might otherwise be overlooked by hurried eyes. Water reflections offer a hidden dimension to the Shaki technique. In a borrowed scenery garden, a still pond can double the Japanese garden backdrop, capturing the sky, trees, and distant hills in its mirrored surface. This creates a feeling of depth and infinity, where the boundary between earth and sky seems to dissolve. On windy days, the ripples turn the reflection into a moving painting, reminding you that borrowed scenery is never static, it's always alive. Even in modern neighborhoods, the Shaki technique can thrive. A borrowed scenery garden might frame the silhouette of a city skyline at dusk, letting the Japanese garden backdrop glow with warm lights against the evening sky. By softening this view with foreground bamboo or flowering shrubs, you create harmony between the built world and the natural one. It's proof that borrowed scenery is not limited to ancient landscapes. It can live anywhere if you learn to see it. Small spaces benefit deeply from the Shaki technique in a courtyard just 10 feet wide. A borrowed scenery garden might frame the upper branches of a distant maple tree, making it feel as if your garden extends into the sky. The Japanese garden backdrop becomes a continuation of your space, erasing boundaries. Even the sliver of horizon can make a modest garden feel expansive. The Shaki technique invites you to borrow not just landscapes, but textures. A borrowed scenery garden might align your gravel pathway with a distant stone wall, or match your pond's ripples with a nearby stream. The Japanese garden backdrop becomes a conversation partner, echoing shapes and movements. Your garden doesn't just look outward, it listens and responds to the world around it. Framing borrowed scenery is an act of patience. The Shaki technique often involves waiting for the right moment in light, season, or growth. A borrowed scenery garden may need years before a pine grows tall enough to frame distant hills. The Japanese garden backdrop is a collaboration between your vision and time itself. In this waiting, you learn that beauty unfolds slowly, and it is worth the wait. Sometimes, the Shaki technique calls for removing rather than adding. In a borrowed scenery garden, a Japanese garden backdrop might be hidden by overgrown shrubs or structures. By clearing a sightline, you reveal a distant lake or mountain. The transformation can be startling. Your garden feels twice as large and alive. Shaki teaches that a single, well-placed view can be more powerful than any decoration. Color harmony deepens the connection in a borrowed scenery garden. With the Shaki technique, you might choose azaleas that echo the pink of distant cherry trees. Your Japanese garden backdrop then feels like part of a single composition. In autumn, the reds of nearby maples might reflect faraway hills. This subtle matching ties your garden to its surroundings through color's quiet language. Light is one of the most overlooked tools in the Shaki technique. A borrowed scenery garden might be placed so the setting sun passes through a gap in your trees, illuminating the Japanese garden backdrop in gold. At dawn, mist may soften distant scenery into a dreamlike painting. By designing with light, your garden tells a story not just through form, but through the daily theater of illumination. Wind can shape a borrowed scenery garden. The Shaki technique may frame a view where tall grasses sway in the distance, their movement reflected in your plantings. This Japanese garden backdrop adds rhythm and life, reminding you that gardens are never still. In autumn, distant leaves may dance in the breeze, their motion drawing the eye. The same wind touching both near and far makes the scenery feel alive. Water beyond your garden is a rare gift for the Shaki technique. A borrowed scenery garden might frame a river bend, the glimmering surface leading your gaze outward. The Japanese garden backdrop could be the sea itself, visible between two pines. Even a small canal can extend your garden's openness. The outside water becomes part of your own story, linking your sanctuary to nature's greater flow. Architecture can be part of a borrowed scenery garden. With the Shaki technique, a distant pagoda, temple gate, or rustic farmhouse can serve as the Japanese garden backdrop. These elements add cultural depth. Grounding your design in place, they remind you that gardens are about plants, but also about the relationship between human presence and nature. The view becomes beautiful and rooted in history. The Shaki technique embraces impermanence. A borrowed scenery garden may feature a backdrop that changes in a single day. A storm rolling over hills, fog lifting from a forest, or cranes landing in a field. These fleeting moments are impossible to control, yet part of the garden's beauty. Shaki teaches acceptance. The most moving scenery is often the one that arrives without warning. Winter reveals the bones of a borrowed scenery garden. The Shaki technique might highlight a bare hillside, the shape of its ridges, now visible without foliage. The Japanese garden backdrop in winter is quiet, almost monochrome, allowing structure to shine. Branches become calligraphy against the sky, stones gain new weight. Even the stillness of snow can feel like part of your peaceful composition. Spring transforms the Shaki technique into renewal. A borrowed scenery garden might align early blooms with a Japanese garden backdrop of distant cherry trees in blossom. The pink haze beyond seems to spill into your space, merging boundaries, birds returning to. Distant woods may sing into your courtyard. Every element feels connected, as if your garden breathes in rhythm with the larger landscape. Summer deepens the colors in a borrowed scenery garden. With Shaki, your Japanese garden backdrop might be a wall of green forest, lush and dense, offering shelter and privacy. Distant rivers sparkle under the sun, reflections dancing in your pond. The air feels thick with life. Your garden a sanctuary from the heat, shaded and cool, yet still connected to the vibrant world beyond. Autumn may be the most dramatic season for Shaki. A borrowed scenery garden could frame a hillside ablaze with crimson and gold. The Japanese garden backdrop turns your space into a living painting. Every gust scatters leaves, creating a slow rain of color drifting between your garden and the view. The air carries crispness, making each glance toward the scenery feel sharper, more vivid, more alive. Framing sky in a borrowed scenery garden shifts with weather. Shaki might capture pastel sunrise or the fire of sunset. Clouds become brushstrokes across your Japanese garden backdrop, changing mood by the hour. A summer storm brings drama. A winter sky offers serenity. The sky connects your garden to the vastness above, reminding you that beauty is as much about openness as detail. Urban gardens can embrace Shaki. A borrowed scenery garden in the city might frame a historic building, or rooftops softened by vines. The Japanese garden backdrop could be a mature tree in a public park, even in crowded places. Borrowed scenery invites you to see surroundings as design allies, turning the view outside into a natural extension of your own sanctuary. Shaki works beautifully with reflective surfaces in a borrowed scenery garden. A glass wall or sliding shoji door might catch the Japanese garden backdrop, pulling it indoors. The view becomes part of your home's interior. On rainy days, droplets streaking the glass add poetic softness to distant scenery, making it feel intimate and close even when far beyond your reach. Night brings quiet magic to a borrowed scenery garden. Shaki might frame the moon rising over distant hills, the Japanese garden backdrop glowing silver. Lanterns in the distance cast warm reflections into your pond. Even silhouettes of trees or temple. Roofs gain beauty under starlight. Designing for nighttime views keeps your garden connected, not only in daylight, but in the calm of darkness. Fragrance can enhance Shaki in surprising ways. A borrowed scenery garden might align blooming wisteria with a distant field of lavender or clover, so the air carries scents from beyond. The Japanese garden backdrop becomes multisensory, felt through the eyes and nose. As breezes bring these scents into your space, you're reminded that borrowed scenery is not just visual, it is an exchange with the living environment. Sound is part of a borrowed scenery garden. Shaki might frame a distant waterfall, so the Japanese garden backdrop includes its gentle roar. Even the rustle of faraway bamboo adds depth. Bird song from distant trees can spill into your garden, making the outside world part of your own. By embracing these sounds, you turn borrowed scenery into an immersive experience that engages every sense. In some cases, the Shaki technique borrows scenery not from nature, but from culture. A borrowed scenery garden might align with a seasonal festival lantern display, or the slow passage of boats on a distant canal. These moments turn your Japanese garden backdrop into a bridge between personal and communal space, reminding you that gardens are part of a larger human story. Framing water beyond your garden often benefits from height. The Shaki technique might place a seating area where you can look over reeds toward a shimmering lake. In a borrowed scenery garden, the Japanese garden backdrop could be a river's gentle curve, disappearing into mist. Elevated views connect your garden to the larger waterways that sustain life and beauty in the region. Gardens using the Shaki technique often feel larger than they are because of borrowed depth. A borrowed scenery garden might position stepping stones to lead toward the Japanese garden backdrop, drawing the eye beyond the boundary. This illusion of space allows even small gardens to feel grand, extending into hills, trees, or skyline without moving a single wall or fence. Some borrowed scenery gardens are designed to be viewed from a single, perfect spot. The Shaki technique might place a bench so that the Japanese garden backdrop aligns flawlessly with your foreground. This encourages stillness, a place to sit, breathe, and take in the view. From here, you might watch light shift across distant hills for hours, noticing changes you'd miss in passing. Other designs using the Shaki technique invite movement. A borrowed scenery garden might have multiple framed views, each revealed as you walk. One turn might show a Japanese garden backdrop of a mountain ridge, another, the glint of a far-off lake. This layered discovery mirrors life itself, each step revealing something new, each perspective shaped by where you stand. Borrowing scenery can also mean borrowing the mood of the day. The Shaki technique allows a borrowed scenery garden to shift with weather. A Japanese garden backdrop under rain feels hushed and introspective, while in bright sun it feels open and welcoming. Your garden becomes a reflection of the world's emotions, teaching beauty in every state, from quiet gray to golden afternoons. In small urban homes, even a distant rooftop garden can be part of the Shaki technique. A borrowed scenery garden might frame a neighbor's flowering trellis, as if it were your own. The Japanese garden backdrop becomes a shared beauty, maintained by someone else, yet enriching your daily life. This reminds us that community and connection are as valuable as individual creativity. The Shaki technique thrives when it feels effortless. A borrowed scenery garden should make the Japanese garden backdrop seem like it has always belonged there, even if carefully planned. The most skillful designs hide the work, allowing the view to feel natural and inevitable. This quiet blending creates peace where boundaries dissolve, and your garden becomes part of the surrounding landscape. Sometimes, the borrowed scenery is temporary, and that is its gift. The Shaki technique might frame the fleeting bloom of a distant wisteria or snow on mountain peaks. A borrowed scenery garden teaches you to cherish these moments precisely because they pass. The Japanese garden backdrop becomes a reminder of impermanence, beauty made more precious by its brevity. At times, the Shaki technique asks you to work with what you have, even if imperfect. A borrowed scenery garden might frame a weathered fence, softened by climbing ivy, turning it into a Japanese garden backdrop of texture and charm. Not every borrowed view needs to be dramatic. Sometimes the quiet, humble scenes carry the most warmth, grounding your garden in authenticity. For those who live near hills or mountains, the Shaki technique offers endless possibilities. A borrowed scenery garden can align your pots, lanterns, and plants to lead the eye toward the Japanese garden backdrop of rugged peaks. As clouds wrap and unwrap the mountains throughout the day, the mood of your garden changes too. This constant transformation keeps the borrowed scenery fresh, no matter how many years you've lived with it. If you live near the sea, the Shaki technique can make the horizon part of your daily life. A borrowed scenery garden might frame the Japanese garden backdrop of waves breaking far beyond your space. This view can be softened with coastal grasses or pine trees in your own garden, blending near and far into one continuous seascape. The shifting tides of light make the borrowed scenery endlessly new, even as the composition remains timeless. The Shaki technique also works with man-made water. A borrowed scenery garden might align with the surface of a reservoir or lake, created centuries ago. The Japanese garden backdrop becomes a mix of human effort and natural beauty, reminding you that harmony can exist between design and the environment. This perspective encourages gratitude for landscapes shaped not just by nature, but by the hands of those who came before. Some borrowed scenery gardens focus on a single living subject. The Shaki technique might frame a lone ancient tree standing beyond your garden wall, its gnarled branches stretching like history itself. This Japanese garden backdrop offers constancy, a presence that remains through all seasons. Watching its leaves change, its blossoms open, or its snow-covered limbs rest becomes a meditation in itself, connecting your small world to a life much older and larger. In rural areas, the Shaki technique can borrow entire fields. A borrowed scenery garden might open onto the Japanese garden backdrop of golden rice paddies in autumn or fresh green shoots in spring. These agricultural views carry not only visual beauty, but also the rhythm of human work and seasonal cycles. Your garden becomes linked to the life beyond it, not only aesthetically, but spiritually as part of a living, working landscape. The Shaki technique isn't just about looking outward, it's about inviting the world inward. A borrowed scenery garden uses its Japanese garden backdrop to create emotional openness. Whether the view is of distant hills, rooftops, or sky, it expands your sense of space and belonging. This is the heart of Shaki, dissolving the sense of separation between yourself and a larger environment, until the garden and the world beyond feel like one continuous home. Designing with the Shaki technique often feels like composing music. A borrowed scenery garden has quiet notes, subtle textures in the Japanese garden backdrop, and crescendos like a sudden burst of blossoms beyond your fence. By balancing these elements, you create a rhythm that keeps the view alive. The garden becomes not just a place to see, but a place to feel, with every borrowed detail contributing to the harmony of the whole. The joy of a borrowed scenery garden is that it keeps teaching you. With the Shaki technique, the Japanese garden backdrop may look different every time you visit, shaped by light, weather, and your own changing perspective. Over years, you may find beauty in corners you once overlooked. This ongoing relationship ensures that the garden never feels finished. It remains a conversation with nature that deepens with time. Ultimately, the Shaki technique is about humility. A borrowed scenery garden acknowledges that your view is part of something larger, landscapes shaped by nature, neighbors, and history. The Japanese garden backdrop you frame is not yours to own, only to honor. By designing with this awareness, your garden becomes an act of gratitude, a way of saying thank you to the beauty that exists beyond your control. Thank you for walking with me through the art of the Shaki technique and the beauty of the borrowed scenery garden. As you create your own Japanese garden backdrop, may you see not just your boundaries, but the world beyond as part of your sanctuary. If this journey has inspired you, I invite you to subscribe for more serene garden insights. Like this video and share it with others who dream of bringing nature closer to home.